Now, the government is hoping to make, quote, concrete progress, unquote, on a new deal with France to tackle illegal migration when the talks between the two countries continue at Downing Street today.
So far, after talks between Sir Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, the UK and France have agreed a new deterrent is needed to tackle the small boats.
But what form should that deterrent take? What will it take? Well, the Defence Secretary, John Healey, joins us now live from Westminster. Good morning, Mr. Healey. Thank you for being here. OK, well, all the reports this morning, front page of the Times, you name it, are that this deal will mean, effectively, that 50 illegal asylum seekers are going to be sent home each week starting next month. That's 50 a week. But when we know that 2,000 of them arrived in small boats alone in the last 7 days, this is just a puff of breath in the teeth of a gale, isn't it?
Well, as you say, the small boats will be part of the discussion at the summit this morning. The detail will be announced between President Macron and the Prime Minister later. But this summit is bigger than small boats. It's the first state visit of any European ally since Brexit. So it's a big moment for Britain as we reset relations with Europe, as we promised to do at the last election.
We want to talk about the significance of the state visit. We want to get straight to the nitty-gritty, which 93% of our viewers are deeply concerned about. So can we just get straight down to the basics? I'll repeat it. If this deal is the way it's reported to go, 50 illegal asylum seekers will be sent back each week. At the moment, 2,000 are arriving every 7 days. It doesn't add up, does it?
Well, first of all, I and the government share the concerns of your viewers. The last government totally lost control of our borders. We have to reduce small boats. There is no simple or single fix to this. And the important thing about today is that for the first time, the French have accepted this is a shared challenge. They are working together with us. So you're starting to see things happening now that weren't happening before. So increased beach patrols, more drones. We saw last week the French enforcement officers stopping boats in the shallow waters. And it's a combination of these things that has helped us stop 12,000 crossings already this year.
One boat, just a moment, we saw one boat stopped in shallow waters in full view of a conveniently placed film crew. Many more boats have been leaving, including our own reporter this morning saw a large boatload of people being picked up at various points along the French coast near Garraway, and it's on its way here now. There wasn't a police officer in sight.
Exactly so. But what you saw last week, and the film crew caught it, was for the first time a recognition that France have agreed to change their rules so that their police can intervene and stop boats in the shallow waters. We now need to see that fully implemented. We need to see the new Borders Bill passed by Parliament to give our enforcement agencies the sort of counter-terrorism powers that may be needed to smash the gangs. And we need to see the new Border Security Command that we set up after the election build up its strength and its force. And it's a combination of things like that, plus any steps that can be announced in the summit, that together will help us reduce the small boat crossings
and when will that
and get
happen?
Control of
Control
of our borders.
And how much longer are the British public, who are so concerned about this, how much longer are they going to have to wait till all of those disparate policies you just listed come together and solve the problem? A year, 5 years, 10 years?
Look, I quite understand why the public are asking that, but I think you'll understand and they'll understand. They've heard politicians before make promises that simply haven't been kept. David Cameron said he'd reduce migration to tens of thousands. It was 700,000 in the last year of the Tory government. They heard Sunak say he would stop small boats before the last election. And we're not going to make those promises that we can't know that we can keep. But what we can say is that we're bending every effort. We're putting in place a range of different steps that will help us deal with this small boats problem. And we've already deported 30,000 people in this last year alone, failed asylum seekers with no right to stay in Britain that haven't been deported at those levels before. It's steps like that that will help us get on top of this problem for the long term.
One of the reasons, of course, that we're accused of being a soft touch is because of our benefits system. And there's another story which is quite an awkward one for the government this morning, and I wanted you to address it if you don't mind. This is a report from the Centre for Social Justice, a think tank set up by Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, who's the former Work and Pensions Secretary, who introduced universal credit. And it finds that a non-working universal credit claimant receiving the average housing benefit and personal independence payment for ill health will have an income of £25,000 in 26-27, which compares with someone working full-time and on the national living wage who would earn comparatively £22,500 after income tax and national insurance. Do you recognise those figures?
I don't recognise those figures. I'm not familiar with the figures, but I suspect those figures for benefits claimants are based on someone getting every benefit going. And what has to happen is that we change the benefits system so that work does pay more than benefits, and that we get over the problem that's been inbuilt into the system in recent years that produces perverse incentives for people to claim their benefits, essentially have to say they're not fit for work.
Yes.
And so part of the welfare changes are to provide people with the guaranteed right to try work without losing their benefits, the support to get into work, because that's what we want people to be able to do, meet their own aspirations, stand on their own 2 feet, and in the end, earn more for them and their families than they will if they're on benefits.
Yeah, the trouble is that Sir Ian Duncan-Smith says this shows the failure of the government to get through the changes to welfare and to achieve real reform, where you have a situation where it is clearly at those figures, £25,000 compared to £22,500, more beneficial not to work than it is to work.
Well, the welfare legislation that was passed last night in the Commons is the first step towards some of those reforms that probably Ian Duncan-Smith and I would both want to see in the system. And we have to reform the system. We have to make sure that it provides people with the opportunity to work, but also the incentives and some of the sanctions that make sure that people who can work do work, and that the benefit system for the long term is there for people who can't, because they're the people who really need our social security system in the future.
Just before we let you go, one of the things you wanted to talk about was that the UK and France, of course, Emmanuel Macron, this is all part of the discussions, we're strengthening our bond over nuclear weapons, as I understand it. What's going on?
Well, thank you for asking that. I'll be joining the summit shortly after this interview, and the summit will discuss small boats. Yes, it'll confirm a really deep defence agreement, which is about closer nuclear coordination between us and the French, the only 2 European nations with independent nuclear deterrence, closer cooperation on nuclear testing, trials and exercising, but also closer military coordination. Our 2 nations ready to activate a 50,000 strong combined force to defend Europe if needed and strengthen NATO, but also greater coordination on military industrial contracts, new missile production and development that gives our military a leading edge against adversaries, but importantly, makes sure that defence drives the economic growth, and in this case, with what we're announcing, supports at least 1,600 really high-paid, high-skilled, long-term jobs for the future, and it's a demonstration of
Can you just explain the nuclear deal? Could you explain the nuclear deal?
Dividend for the country.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you just explain the nuclear deal a bit more? Are you simply saying that it's like a mini NATO, that an attack on one country, France, would be seen as an attack on 2? I thought that was NATO was for that.
Well, on nuclear, both France and the UK have sovereign independent nuclear deterrence. The UK has always committed ours to NATO, in other words, to strengthen and protect the other NATO nations. What the 2 nations are saying today, France and the UK, is that in the extreme circumstances where any adversary was threatening us or NATO allies, we would coordinate our independent nuclear deterrence and therefore provide a more powerful protection and deterrence against any adversary that might consider such extreme threats or attacks.
In other words, we'd pack a heavier punch.
We'd pack a heavier punch together, and that's a great way of putting it, Richard.
Thank you.
John Healey, Defence Secretary, thanks very much indeed.